Good evening and welcome to Open Minds tonight. I have a very, very special guest tonight, and it's Michael Joseph. Now, I said the other day, yesterday actually on Open Minds, I'm not reading anyone's bios no more. I can have a conversation and chat for England and go on for eternity. If I have to be formal and read out the bios, I get lost in transit because my mind's already thinking now, I'm going to ask him this, I'm going to ask him that. So I'm asking my guests now to come on, and the best and also what's come to my attention recently is when someone sends you their bio, it's normally out of date because they've achieved such amazing things since they wrote the first bio. It's not included, and then they add it in the show. So no pressure again to Michael, no pressure at all. Welcome to Open Minds. And before we get onto our topic, which is occultism and dualism and its effect on humanity from ancient times, hint, hint, Michael, just give us a brief bio of who you are, and what you've done.
Well, Gloria, thank you for having me on. It's been a while since I've done a show like this, so it's kind of nice to be back. But yeah, I've just really just a dude out there who was thinking there was something wrong with the world growing up, and that, you know, shifts to varying degrees of wonderment about what's happening. And then at some point I hit a place in my life where I just kind of needed to learn more and think more about things, you know, spiritually, as redundant as that sounds. It's just kind of what happened. So I started researching this or that. I was pursuing music, and so that kind of goes hand in hand with looking into esoteric topics or things like that. And then, so long story short, it just kind of snowballed into this whole giant research project. Some people responded positively to it. Obviously my views have changed a lot since I started, but what I can do is just share with people the various things that I found, and then you can let it all, you know, you can see what it all means to you. So I guess that's
I always say, if something resonates with you, take it and go and do your own research. And if it doesn't, just put it to one side. We're all on our individual journeys. We're all doing our own research in our own way. And the show's about sharing everyone's journey and any areas that they've got expertise in, or they've been researching for a long time. Now, here comes no pressure for you, Michael. Let's get into occultism and dualism. How far did you go back and detect this? Where did you, how far back?
I think really, I mean, all these things go back and repeat in a way. And as Solomon says, nothing new under the sun. There's lots of different themes that have, I would say, kind of like core principles or these core themes driving human behavior and whatnot, but you put on different sets of clothing. And so I guess I would kind of look at it as like two different bodies, since we'll talk about dualism here, but different clothes can go on those bodies. So I think a lot of times people might see the clothing and only think that's what it is without recognizing the body underneath it. And then over time, certain bodies get different scars and they become more identifiable if you know what to look for. And so I think that that's kind of what I started to realize. There's certain characteristics or features of this or that you can identify particular ideas. And then as it gets more complex, these things start getting mixed. And then certain mixtures of ideas become more of an abomination than others. But that's that all depends on how you perceive it as well. So I think that the best time to focus on is probably the time of what people call, you know, early Christianity, right? 0 to 100 AD, give or take a century or two. And then that is the time where things rapidly started to shift and change in what you call apocalyptic, but in the sense of unveiling things, not so much as like what a lot of people think about as like end times fear porn with like comets destroying everything, right?
I call it a spiritual apocalypse from what's happening. My truth is, I don't say, it's not end time. Even now, it's a spiritual apocalypse. And I think it's always been a spiritual apocalypse through the evolution of humanity. Yeah, it resonates with me.
Yeah, because the apocalypse in its, I guess like Catholic context, which is kind of like Protestant one, it's more of that unveiling of things, and then people are able to be confronted with the truth of the reality that they live in, and then you can make a choice based on that, whether you want to rebel against it, go with it, or wherever you want to go with it. And right now I'd say we're kind of in a similar kind of situation. So maybe a lot of these things, people will kind of make a connection, be like, oh, that kind of sounds like today, but again, with a different set of clothing. So maybe that could be useful for people. So
it's a good analogy, the separate place. It's a good analogy. I mean, I said, I'm of not any faith, as Michael knows. However, I do, I have a truth that there is a source, call it a God. I have no issue with it. And I tell you how this can change for my personal truth. I remember I was raised in a Christian country, Christian school, Church of England. And I remember being told about this man, Jesus. He was the Son of God. And then other religions said he was God. And I remember at that time, because of the belief systems that my family and my community had put upon me, it was their beliefs and I believed them. But however, that part, I couldn't. It just never, ever resonated. This is where you eat humble pie. And that went on for a long, long time. And then I studied comparative religions, and I was always focused on this being Jesus, all the way through them. Judaism, Islam, every single thing. He was just this Jesus. And I said, no. And always kept saying, it's blasphemous to say this man is God. And that was the dogma and indoctrination of the faiths. Now, he was God. We're all gods. In my truth, we're all gods. We're all part of source. So, but it was the clothing that was put upon him at my time, and there was conflict between the Catholic Church and the Christian Church. I mean, it was, because I'm an Irish family, and I was around, alive, with the goings on in Ireland between the Protestants and the, so it had a massive effect on me, seeing, and I kept saying it's one faith, but with different masks. Does that make, is that what you're talking about? Why I've gone into this is to broaden it out for everyone, maybe to understand. You say clothes, but I saw, or have I got that totally wrong?
It's kind of a similar thing, right? A mask could be part of clothing. So,
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And then with anything, you have to see what's similar, what's not, and then you kind of order things in terms of priority, right? If like, if I have a shirt sleeve and it's cotton or wool or whatever, it's still a sleeve.
Yeah.
And then sometimes people will try to like split hairs about it because of that. Or if you're trying to tell me that a sleeve is actually a pant leg, those are very different things, but some people are super convinced. So really, it comes down to a balance of looking at something holistically, but also looking at the details, and you try to match them up as best you can to something that is logically consistent, but also is, spiritually fulfilling, or
I'm with you. I'm with you.
You have to unify your emotions and the feelings, and kind of like your soul, or maybe what you call right brain kind of activity. With the left brain, things also need to make sense. They have to have a purpose and be logical, but you can't go too far to one side, otherwise that's where the dualism starts to happen.
Absolutely. It's about for me, my new terminology is about being either going on the middle road or being neutral, because I'm fully aware of duality and how I don't want to partake anymore in duality. I'm fully aware that the whole human experience is about duality, but I've done that, thank you very much. And now I'm at this point now, I just, in current times especially, I'm trying to stay in the neutral path. And when you stay in the neutral path, and then you can hold yourself there, then go and look at ancient civilizations, ancient faiths, religions, cults, then I think you have more of an expanded observation of it, because the biases and the bigotry are what you've been told by your peers wherever you're born doesn't come into play, does not come into play. Does that resonate with you as well?
Yeah, I mean, especially growing up, what I would say, really, our society is grounded in quote unquote enlightenment principles, so called, and that can have some positive and negative effects. So there's kind of like another conundrum there, where if you're too open, then there's so many ideas and you're lost in the realm of ideas. So you need to have you need to start being able to measure things by a certain criteria. And so I think that that's what people need to find, that balance. And I would also say that in terms of dualism, this is what I would call dialectics, where you have a false opposition.
Yes.
And then certain perhaps oligarchs try to create a fake unity out of that opposition.
Yes. Yes.
And to me, there's a fake unity and a more real one. And so you have to be careful about that as well. So I think that all those themes will apply to kind of what I can talk about here in these times.
I'm hearing that statement a lot, false opposition. And you can see it whether in this country, whether you're conservative or Labour, we all say it's the same thing. It's a false and illusionary dualism opposition. Now, if you go to one, you're feeding the dualism. If you go to the other, you're feeding the other dualism. Is that what you're saying?
I'd say that that's true if the thing you're arguing about is a false opposition. Now, some things could be a legit right or wrong, right? If I'm going to say 2 + 2 = 4, the classic 1984 analogy, if you're going to tell me to say that that's not true, or there's another answer, then I'm going to fight you on that. You know what I mean? So it's like, it depends on what you're talking about.
Yeah, you've got your discernment and you've got your logic, but let's just say we're not all like morons, and we've got a bit of logic in that. But basically, you can. I'm trying to expand upon the definition of dualism before we go into it, and how it works in societies with the false opposition.
Well, let me start talking about some of the various occult movements, and just they'll give examples of them, because it's not going to be just one thing or the other. It's just pitting something against itself that can be harmonized in a proper way. We'll put it that way. So one of the classic ones that ties back to ancient Gnosticism. Now, again, I'm sure lots of people have talked about Gnosticism or this or that, and I think a lot of people can be confused on what it is, and they can kind of romanticize and make it out to be something grand and ethereal that it never was. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things about it is that a general aspect of it is the rebellion against the creator in Gnosticism came from Judaism, where they had their conception of the creator, and they started mixing that with the bad gods around them. So, for example, Saturn, or Set, Typhon, or whatever. These are the bad deities of the pagan cultures. So they started fusing that, and they started mixing these things in kind of a syncretic way, on one hand, and then they started assigning those qualities to the creator. And then so they started saying creation is evil. It was created by an evil god, and our bodies are intrinsically evil, and only spirit is good. So there's one dualism: only spirit good, matter equals bad. Now, there were some strands of this that said the creator's bad, but the matter itself is good if we have the gnosis. And this basically turns, in my opinion, into scientific elitism, where science solves everything, and then all of a sudden mankind's own knowledge is what's going to unify things, and we see how that's going today. But so that's kind of one aspect of it. And there's a Gnostic scholar, he's passed away, Gillis Quispel. He wrote a bunch on it. He's a pro-Gnostic, so I'm not citing somebody who's against them here. He was talking about how there was this strands of Gnosticism that basically is like a primitive Marxism, if you want to call it that, with the dialectics of Sophia, which is a Greek word for wisdom. That is like this principle of spirit that in the Gnostic myth, Sophia accidentally births the bad creator and ascends or whatever, and basically has kind of an abortion, basically, if you read like texts like On the Origin of the World or whatever. And I'd say that's actually a prototype for like the feminism and abortion movement. Like the Gnostic Sophia is like their deity in a way, without them knowing it, I would say. But if you look into like ritual magic, when Crowley talks about the most powerful type of ritual magic is reenacting the myth of a deity. So I would argue that like people like Gloria Steinem or whatever, they're like reenacting the myth of Sophia. And so that's kind of like a weird magical ritual that's been imposed upon society on that kind of camp of political action, if you will.
But would that on you know, when you reenact the deity, so and if you're saying, I mean, I've been talking recently saying about, people are talking about rituals and things that people do and how powerful we are as beings when we do a ritual, whether for good or bad, you know. It has that power. And not many people realize that. They just poo-poo it, but it does. If you believe it, you're attracted to yourself. Ultimately, if you go the negative, it will destroy you. It will destroy you. I mean, that's obvious.
Yeah, and everything, people need to be honest, like everything is religion and rituals, but we just want to call it something different.
No, we don't. I mean, there's so much of it. I mean,
so you know, if we think people are a little bit more honest about it, it's just depending on what its intention is and what you're doing and how you detail it, that really matters, rather than like, oh look, they're doing a ritual, it's the same thing. It's like, well, why are they doing it and what are they doing it for? It really does matter.
Absolutely.
So there's one version of it where this myth turned into this view of dialectics of spirit and matter, and basically that's the result of history. So really a lot of like evolutionary theory and stuff goes back to this, and I can explain how this kind of happened in the Middle Ages. But before we get there, I'll talk about some of the other groups. So you have some of these Gnostics, they disagreed on this or that or whatever. There's another faction that some people don't say is Gnostic. They call it Encretite. It was very dualist in the sense that only male things were good and female things represented creation, and creation was evil. So the woman is an archetype of evil. So a woman brings children into the earth, and that's bad because you're procreating, you're trapping souls and stuff like that. And so therefore women were seen as not worthy of life. If you look at the Gospel of Thomas, a lot of people, for some reason, herald that as a feminist gospel. I don't really understand it, because if you read the very last line, conveniently at the very end, it says women aren't worthy of life and they need to be changed into men in order to be saved. And so this is the context, that they need to be of spirit, because spirit is of the masculine nature. So now you're pitting man and woman against each other and spirit and matter against each other. And so this really, in my opinion,
building up.
This Encretism, if you want to call it that, it was like extreme celibacy. Men were only supposed to stay celibate. You couldn't have any women because that would not lead you into heaven. So it's this extreme fanatical asceticism. So there's kind of like a dualism of that too, with a radical asceticism and then a radical libertinism where like do what thou will, anything goes sexually. And that's kind of like Sabbatean Frankism or something. So those are other dialectics that are dualistic. And then I would argue that Encretism kind of took root, or it kind of fused with Persian culture. The Zoroastrian culture was it was magical, but it was kind of hardcore. It had the good god and the bad god, Ahriman versus I think it's Ahrimanzar or whatever. But the point is, they were very puritanical about like homosexuality. The Persian culture was very persecuting towards them. So you can kind of see that anti-women mixed with like extreme attacks on homosexuals. And rising out of Islam, rising out of Persia, which overtook it. And so you can see that kind of fusion there. And then they were always battling Christianity and Byzantium, which was, you know, dealing with some of those cultures, what I would call like LGBT cultures of the day, in ways that there was an emperor that attacked a group that was like, I think it was like a gay charioteer or something like that. And then it caused a riot, and the emperor suppressed it violently. And one of the Christians, St. Ambrose, told him that was bad, that was wrong. And so you know, in that instance, he's defending that culture because it was wrong to go persecute them in such a violent way. So I think that some of the violence towards women and homosexuality, even if Christianity thinks that, you know, that has a problem with LGBT culture, the way you deal with that is very different. And so I would say some of that hardcore way that most people are very upset about is actually a byproduct of some of that fanaticism in
I'm with you.
the Middle East or whatever.
I'm
And
with
so
you.
I think that Islam rising out of that weird admixture is kind of part of that, in my opinion. So that Islam is kind of dualistic, right? Infidel or not, or whatever. Whereas the Catholic Church was taking in pagan culture, but doing what I'd call Catholic alchemy, taking what is good and true and working with the gospel. And this is how they developed intellectual arguments. Like, they benefited greatly. And the whole idea is that, you know, the creator set it up where Rome had the infrastructure and the laws and whatever. And then Greece had the philosophy and the abstract thinking, and the fusion of those two cultures, along with the new Christian movement, was this middle path between all of these dialectics.
I mean, it's you know, I mean, obviously studying comparative religions myself in the past, and you know, because we are talking about you know, false opposition. There's a lot of it. I mean, you can see it in that. However, I found with a lot of the Abrahamic religions, or Christianity, Judaism, especially, and when I say Christianity, you've got Catholicism at the same time, it started out with the spiritual source, and at some point, the fundamental controllers come in that way. And that's how I see it. And either there was duality there, not all the time. One went one way, one went the other. And look how Christianity split between Catholicism and Protestant. I mean, the split is just, you know, I used to say back when I was a child, you're the same religion, why are you killing each other? That was in me. And the things like this. So when I did my research and I studied, and I could see that, but it never blinded me, no matter what clothes they were wearing, what group was in power. I mean, I studied the Inquisition in this country. Oh my God. You know, and this country at one point was Catholic, and what went on there and what went on afterwards as well. But I don't perceive it with the coat that they wore, because there's an underlying thing that if you do have a more open mind, because if you just looked at our history, the occultism and the duality we're in, if you stick, oh, well, that was wrong, like that, you're stagnating. You're just stagnating. You're not actually seeing the bigger picture, how it was, and how that come about, and how dualism come about until present day. You know, divide and conquer. It's always divide and conquer with a false opposition. Does that make sense to you? I'm just talking from my truth. So that's why I have no issue, no matter what. You could be, you know, the moon religion, and it's irrelevant to me. You're a human being, and it's your truth, and it's your right to believe what you want. But I can see how radicals come in all aspects, and even from occultism, I thought Crawley was really good at the beginning when I studied him, and then something went somewhere, and I don't like that, that's got dark. But there was a lot of information I could take from that. I could take from Catholicism, I could take from Christianity, I could take from Islam, I could take from Judaism. There was a lot, and I could bring that in to see the bigger picture. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and I think that one of the other misconceptions is lumping Abrahamic all into one. That's where you need to, this is where a false unity, in my opinion, happens, where they're very, very different from each other in very fundamental ways, but there are some commonalities.
Yeah, they say that because they all believe in the prophet Abraham. That's why they're called that. They're the three ones that follow Abraham, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Right. And so here's the difference. And Christ himself makes this distinction. The Pharisees are talking to Christ and saying, we're of Abraham's seed. We follow the religion of Abraham. And Christ says, you might be biologically tied to the Jewish culture, but the way you're interpreting it, the way you're defining it is wrong, and it's of the devil. That's what Christ says to them. So how you define, quote unquote, Abrahamic Jesus Christ himself tells you it really does matter, and he gives you all the definitions that you need to distinguish these things. And so but to fast forward, and I think that things like the Inquisition are wildly misunderstood as well, and I think that that's mostly a product of, again, the Enlightenment and Protestantism, and the so-called Dark Ages, as people call them. So what happens is there's another group kind of based on those Encratites who like the Gospel of Thomas that arises, the Manichaeans. They're one of the most notorious dualist sects, and they arose from this guy named Mani. He was or Mani, you could pronounce his name different ways. I think it's Manes or something, but the point is he was grew up in kind of like a weird multicultural like mixture of Judaism and Christianity and all these different things, but has more of like a Jewish Christian background. And so he starts inserting all this Buddhism into it, and he has this dualism that I would argue is probably more of like, I think it's like Jainism or whatever, that has a very staunch dualism. And so he had more of this idea that probably a lot of people have heard this before, you have a fragment of light trapped in matter, and that's kind of, he was also a radical ascetic as well. And so that version of dualism, I would argue, kind of festered on the outskirts there, and then came in to Byzantium, which is the Christian empire, in the kind of like the 800s or 900s, started creeping into the areas of Bulgaria and into Constantinople, and this started the Cathars. So there's this Cathar church that started and really formulated in Constantinople, and then a particular Cathar bishop took it to southern France. I mean, it started drifting over that way as well, but like that, there's this one guy, Papa Anisitas, and a good book on this is The Cathars by Malcolm Barber. And so the Cathars are another group people like to romanticize about, but if you start listening to some of their ideas, they're a little hardcore and a little problematic. And so they also believed that the creator of matter, the creator of material world, was evil, and if you birth another soul, you're just trapping another soul in matter, and that's evil. And so and obviously the Catholic Church's view is procreation is good. God says to increase and multiply, and life is good, right? You can debate other critiques about what that is, but that's basically the idea. Creation is good. There's issues here or there. There's ways of rectifying it, but the Cathars were they were in the aristocracy and the peasantry, if you will. They were all classes, and they started formulating their own communities. They started kind of infiltrating. They had their own castles in France, and then they started getting into tiffs about these arguments. And so what happened was, during these centuries, this is when scholasticism was around. So a lot of things were based on arguments. They wanted to reason with people. Let's hash out our differences by talking and appealing to logic and whatever. So what happened was they sent some of these clerics or whatever, like this is when the Dominicans and the Franciscan orders were starting to form, to the Cathars to try to debate these issues. And some of them were killed by Cathars or people protecting them. And so as soon as somebody kills you for trying to engage in logical argument, people are probably not going to react so well. So this kind of sentiment started formulating what's called the Cathar Crusade. And so this group also, they're kind of seen as peaceful, loving vegetarians, but if you read the book and you read the testimonies and what some of them are saying and stuff like that, I mean, some of these Cathar priests, like their whole point was being perfect. And that once you got this ritual called consolamentum, which is kind of like a baptism, you had to remain perfect the rest of your life. You weren't able to have sex. You weren't able to do any of these things. And that was the only way to be saved. So this is kind of like the radical Christianity that most people think about. Like, oh, you can only be, you can never commit a sin or whatever, right? And if you don't, you're screwed, right? So this is the Cathar idea. But what happened was most people realized you couldn't live like that. So they try to get this baptism, if you will, this laying on of hands at the end of their life when they were dying, so they wouldn't have to live that. They could live however they wanted and then be like, oh, then I don't commit a sin between now until my death, which will be in 3 days, then I'll be in heaven, right? And so, but what happens is when some of these people would get that ritual and they recovered from their illness, now all of a sudden, oh, I have to live like that. So they'd actually kind of, sometimes that turned into a suicide ritual. And some of these Cathar priests, or perfecti, as you'd call them, you know, they were telling women that when they were pregnant, they had a demon in their belly because having a child is evil. You know, that's pretty screwed up to tell a pregnant woman.
I mean, you know, I'd say it's not just, you know, it's not just one group saying that. I'm not going to shout out names, but if through my years of study, there isn't one. I've heard that everywhere. It's not the same thing, but I've heard it everywhere, to deride the female. And it seems to be a very, very common thread. And I'm just bored of it now. You could just deride away. I really don't care. But I've seen that from, you know, when I studied ancient civilizations as well, even out of the context of religious scriptures, you know, I saw that everywhere. I mean, one thing I'll pull back is about when you talk about, you know, these, how man, this is man, from my truth, created these evil gods. One thing used to get me, the one thing was about this man Jesus, because I always could resonate with about him, and I did his frequency. That's what it was. But then I remember learning, being forced or beaten, by the way, to learn the Old Testament. And when I went back and reread it through studies, I thought, oh, I used to say, if there's a God, he's a God of love. And in the Old Testament, I saw this horrific monster that said, go out and rape and pillage and do all that. But then later on, I saw, this is where you're seeing the duality. This is like mind games that go on. And if you stick with one and you don't open up and you just accept that as a truth, it may not be your truth. It's what you've been told is true. You can say, yeah, but you will resist in the end to find the truth of your journey. In the New Testament, I read again, he got a bit nicer. And I could never even understand an intermediary at all through that. So, and I know there's billions of people that through our civilization, as these groups come in, and it doesn't matter whether it was Cathars or whoever it was, still the spiritual aspect of the source still comes through all the way through, does it not? I just want to bring some joy here. Hello, just we'll lift the vibration. It still comes through, does it not? Even with this duality that's purposely caused. It is purposely caused. A middle path always comes through in the end, does it not?
Well, yeah, and I would actually argue that the Middle Ages, as much shade is thrown on it, was taking that middle path. Yeah. And this is the issue. The Old Testament God being mean and stuff like that, a lot of that is not understanding the nature of what the Bible is and how people wrote. Like when people say God is jealous in the Old Testament, that is the perception of what they're seeing happening.
That's man's perception.
That are they're beyond control of them. Yeah. So they say, oh, when this group is like suffering that or whatever, like they're describing something. So in like, for example, Catholicism, God is not jealous. God is ultimately tranquil and at peace. But when we see certain things acting the way we perceive them, we might start saying God is jealous because he's protecting this or that. And so the other thing too is that the idea that the Old Testament God is different than the New Testament God, that is problematic in a lot of ways if you actually understand the context of what Jesus is quoting in the Old Testament and all these. Actually, that's the problem with the Pharisees, is Christ was saying all these passages of like my Father and what and the Father. He's all citing these Old Testament passages, and actually it's the Cathars who thought the Old Testament God was evil, and that the Creator was evil. So there's this disconnect that happens, and I would argue it's coming from an ultra literalist Protestant culture where you have like this.
I mean, I don't know where it's coming from, and I don't know, I don't know I mean, obviously they were all Jews at the time. Everyone was Jewish at the time. All I know is, I'm just coming from my truth, because I have to give a fair balance to this discussion, is when I'm reading these chapters and I'm saying, who wrote this and when was it wrote? So long after, whatever, that's fine. But when you've got this God that gives permission to go and slaughter them, rape them, slaughter them, and I'm going, I'm sorry, still to this day, it's not in my energy. It couldn't be. So because I had that, it's where I am today. Right. I didn't go to the radical, oh, there's a demon God, oh, that God is it. And one thing I have to say, I have never, ever in my young life feared the source, because I've only experienced unconditional love. And fear for me is a belief system given to be fearful, then you'll be controlled, then you'll follow this group or that group. Does that make sense? So I've got to give a balance in the conversation.
Right. Well, I was trying to provide that balance of looking at the Old Testament without, like, if you look at the Old Testament in the way a lot of the early church fathers read it, it was a lot more typological. There's certain things that are spiritual teachings. It's very esoteric. Whereas I think today, this dualism of literalism, in the sense that this is what we might call modernism, where you take your perception of what warfare is or whatever, and you impose it onto literature, where you need the context of what did this word mean to these people at the time. Is this an allegory or whatever? And so when you can read something with it without knowing these contexts, you're actually not reading it in a way that is in line with the truth of the people who read at the time. So this is where
I resonate with that. Yes.
And so what I'm saying is what you're reacting to here is a dialectic of Protestant Pharisaic literalism, and then honestly a scientific atheism that reacts as just as literally, where like atheists, a lot of them will think because rabbits don't chew, or they do chew the cud, and the Bible says the otherwise.
No, you're right. No, you're right.
And so it's funny how they actually become way more literal, but they're doing it as a reaction and to attack it. So there's another dialectic in my opinion.
Hold on, I got to stop you. You raised a really good point there. That's why I'm jumping in. You just reminded me of something. I love that. It's like when I was in my career, I worked on cold cases, and for example, one of them was from a couple of decades ago, and I knew, coming from my career, I knew I had to see it from their eyes, their language, their cultures, their concepts from like 40, 50 years ago. I couldn't take it from the consciousness now. I couldn't. I had to go and find out what was going on at that time. What was the favorite social aspect? Where did people go at night? How did they articulate? How linguistics have changed? So you've raised, and that's why I jumped in and said, stop, because you raised a really, really valid point that I didn't want to be overlooked or overshadowed. Yes, when I first touched them, reading the scriptures and everything as a child, I was like, I couldn't take that in my current context at what age I was in the 21st century or whatever it was. I'm not that old. But when I went back through my university and studies and everything, and then I went back, I then had an understanding of what you just stated. That's why I don't perceive it the way I did then. Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, and I have the same things that have happened to me and still happen to me, you know. So
that's why I had to stop you, because I got to say, God, you just raised a valid point that we need to bring out and expand upon. When you do research on these people, or anything, you need to research it in the context, the social determinants at the time, including language.
Yeah, and I think back to the Cathar issue, another thing people tend to forget is that the way people live during these times is very different from now. And when you grow up and you're a farmer and you have to feed your family, and if you have a disruption that could kill your family, if you have something going on where your daughter runs off into a cult and is like telling you need to kill your babies or something or whatever. And so it's not a matter of like nowadays, since we have so much technology, the ideas don't have as many consequences like that, where people get distracted because there's so many material resources. Whereas back then, if some of these things started disrupting communities, that could be the life of your community. If somebody went off into la la land and didn't do any work, and now all of a sudden everybody else needs to pick up the slack. And so the disparity of technology is something that a lot of people forget about. And also oral tradition. You know, a lot of people think like, oh, they couldn't read in the Middle Ages, and that's because the evil oligarchy didn't want them to read. That's not true at all. Oral tradition was the predominant culture for a long time.
It wasn't reading and writing. It was.
And I would argue that they had, like, I know lots of people can read really well. They have terrible memories. Back then, all the Bible, even the pagan classics, those were all oral tradition. How, like, remembering, like, if you picked up the Bible lately, how could somebody remember all of that, right? And especially with such accuracy. And so that's another thing people forget about. So this is what happened in the Enlightenment, where there's the idea of education. It became a weaponized to attack.
Now I hear you. I've got to jump in there and say, I had a few guests on recently, and one specifically, and he was talking about the Hopi Indians, the Native American Indians. They didn't write things down, they memorized. It was oral tradition from generation to generation to generation. And it was something that the West, no, that can't, no, we're not having that. We're not, even though in the West, we were at that point one time. And I can see, and then obviously education, forced education had to come in. But the Native American Indians, and they go back tens of thousands of years with old traditions, which is rich and beautiful. Never wrote where they did paintings, as we did as well, but you can see how you can have a really good memory. They had excellent memories. It's true what you say. Today, I can't even remember yesterday. I can't even remember.
And so
that could be age, though. That could be my age.
Another misconception is during the Middle Ages, they had a fusion of astrology and astronomy. So St. Thomas Aquinas even wrote about the difference is the way they viewed astrology. It had certain parameters, but I would argue they're more healthy ones. But they had this understanding that there were inclinations that one might have based upon, you know, whatever zodiac signs, but that man wasn't fated to them. This was the pagan way of looking at it. Oh, I'm a Scorpio, so I'm always fated to having dramatic, intense relationships that self-destruct, right? That would be like kind of like a fated version of that.
Well, everyone goes to an extreme no matter what. That's the duality of it. There's always going to be one, isn't there?
Right. But when you feel like you're fated to something, that is more the pagan conception, whereas the Catholic one was always centered on free will. And this is where the quote unquote Protestant reformers actually brought it back to with getting away from free will with Luther and Calvin. And so what happens is that in that system, the idea is that you might be inclined towards things that aren't so great, but through the proper, you know, spirituality and systems or whatever, you can rise above the things that, you know, you might be inclined to doing. And so this is really, you know, it's kind of like how we look at our parents, right? We see the faults of our parents and we see them come out in us, and we sometimes feel fated to that. But the Catholic system there is that you're not fated to that, but it's not easy to overcome that. But, you know, you need the help of God, and you have to look to something higher. And so that was all part of that system. And then later on, this is what the Enlightenment separated out, and they took away the spiritual mixed with all of the temporal intellectual education stuff and whatever. And so that was another aspect. And the last thing I would mention real quick is once the Cathar Crusade happened, yes, it was bloody and violent, and there were probably atrocities here and there, but the reason they did it, it had a certain amount of understanding based upon the context of the times that these people are kind of getting out of control. And what happened was the Cathars, once they kind of realized they're going to lose, they just kind of like torched themselves. They self-destructed. They just, like, you know, they basically suicided, or they'd like kill their castles or whatever. I mean, again, if you read about what was going on, I'd say the accurate version is there was a lot of problems with this Cathar group. And so what happened was, this is the reason the Inquisition came, because instead of having a big crusade that's going to cause a lot of collateral damage. Because remember, the technology at the time, it's not so easy to deal with these situations. And so they decided that if there's somebody who's walking around saying that if you're pregnant, you have a demon in your belly, then they'll target a specific individual to deal with the situation. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't abuses with the Inquisition, stuff like that, but I'd also mention.
Oh, you can't say there isn't. No, there was. I mean, there's recorded history and I mean, it's any religion you have, there's going to be the negative and the positive, just like with human beings. So we can't airbrush it.
But the irony is that the witch hunts that happened, they didn't happen in countries of the Inquisition, because the Inquisition actually took pity on them and thought that some of these accusations were a little nutty. Whereas in some of the more Protestant areas, where it was mixed with a Catholic culture, but it was succumbing more to the Protestant witch hunt fervor, that's where it all happened. So if you actually read through, like, there's a lot of great books on dealing with these topics. And I'd say the Inquisition, that never targeted pagans. It was impossible by default. And there was an issue with that, the Cathars that mixed with Kabbalah and a lot of the Jews in southern France. These sorts of things ended up causing some problems, and that's kind of the context of it. And this is the context of something like the Rosary coming, where the Cathars had problems with women, and so focusing them on the Mother of God and all these sorts of things, like that was a way of combating that. And so this is where the Middle Ages has been slandered by Masons, the modern Enlightenment establishment, Protestantism. And actually, the other thing I would say is that people heard about the Catholic Spain being so evil or whatever. The attack on the Inquisition is actually mixed with racism, because the Germans and the British, the most white of all nations, they thought that the Spanish Catholics, the propaganda against them was to say that they were mixed with the Moors, which is Africans. And so they were saying the reason that Spain was backwards and the Inquisition was backwards because they were mixed with African blood. This was an attack by white nations.
I've heard both sides of the story. As I said, I wasn't there at the time, and I'm very open-minded, and I do find that history is written by the winners, and they can say whatever. I actually, at this moment in time, don't trust anything I read from the history books, and that's why I'm very open for conversations. But for me, I've always said people should stop blaming the religions. It's the people. You're always going to have some evil little shits, no matter where, whether they're Catholic, Christian, Muslim. You can't attack a form of system that's supposed to be here for humanity, because you've got there's a period of time, the Inquisition, and you don't have to label anybody, it was barbaric, but the victors wrote the books. I mean, you go to this,
but that's my point. The victors who were attacking the Inquisition were attacking it in a barbaric way by saying that it was backwards because
I wasn't there to experience that. But like I told you about Christianity, I have discernment, and I say, well, anything is possible. I'm trying to understand the whole human experience, the occultism, the esoteric, especially my spiritual journey. So I need to be able to be open-minded with it all. I want to jump back, because we need to get onto the occultism and alchemy, and I'm going to say John Dee.
Oh, go John Dee. All right.
What I love him. God. And also there is connection to my ancestry, family. The story of this country, Henry VIII, we were a Catholic country, and this just shows you the instability of the human race. And he wanted a divorce, and the Pope said, "You're not having one. You can't. We forbid it." So he changed us all to C of E, Church of England, and then we had a big massacre everywhere from both sides. And the C of E, and we're still C of E to this day. And for me, I think if you need to look at this, we weren't there, but look at why people did what they did. Now, for the king of this country at the time, it was a personal thing. I'm going to just come out of this religion, I'm going to have that religion because it suits me. And he still chopped off all their friggin' heads. Do you know what? Do you know what I mean? So, you know, barbaric or what? That's barbaric. It wasn't Catholicism that was barbaric, and it wasn't the Church of England that was barbaric when he converted us all. It was the man. Does that make sense? I want the audience to, this is no attack on anyone's faith. This is showing we're trying to bring out different aspects of different occults and dualisms and faiths, that please don't blame them. It's the individual being that causes it. And well, it was Henry VIII in this country that did that.
The irony is he wasn't following the teachings of Christ, because Christ says, if you divorce anybody other than adultery, then that's very, very bad. So his wife, the reason was his wife wasn't able to produce a child.
Yes.
And so he wanted a child. And so to me, you're not leaving it in the hands of God. You're trying to force God's hand, and you're going against exactly what Christ tells you to go against.
No, I get that side of it. I get it.
It led to a disaster.
What I'm trying to say is it wasn't Catholicism, and it wasn't Church of England. It was Henry. He did it because it was for his own ego. It was not spiritual. And these discussions are needed because the division with duality between faiths, I mean, I've never had any division with anyone's faith, as you know. It doesn't matter. I'll have a discussion. I'm not scared to talk about it. However, I want this known. It was Henry VIII. It wasn't Catholicism, and it wasn't C of E. And I am not of them religions, but that's the truth. And I just had to say my bit.
Yeah. And then after that, what happens is during, well, a little bit before the Renaissance, like 1300s to 1400s, there's certain things that are developing. One of them is a radical group of Franciscans. They're called the Franciscan Spirituals. And basically, there's a great book, Brill's Companion Guide to Joachim Fiore, where there was this, Joachim Fiore was this apocalyptic visionary, and then these Franciscan Spirituals ran with these ideas and basically invented communism, what it would become. And so this radical group was, well, persecuted by the Inquisition, as much as people want to be upset about that, but perhaps with good reason, because the communists who came in and led to all these slaughters in Russia, or, you know, the so-called Great Leap Forward, they were hearkening back to these Middle Ages alchemists and these radicals. One of them was John of Rupiskisa, and he had this whole schema about this new world order in the church, synchronicity of religions, and everything is, you have to read it, but basically modern communism, it's not atheistic. It actually, all these communist writers were pointing to these Franciscan radicals, saying this was the real Christianity. But look what the result of that was. It was this massive destruction and all these wars and, you know, genocide. So similar to what you were saying with Henry VIII, that decision of a leader leads to consequences all around it.
Absolutely. A leader of any country or any faith, you know, a leader of the consequences can be dire for a lot of people, and horrifically dire. And that's the way this humanity, I mean, we're looking back through a looking glass now, and we're all coming with our own perspective, but that's how it has been. And we're coming to the point now, but we're going to do a John D. We're looking at duality in current times, and because we want to stop the duality, we want to, the whole point of, you know, having you on the show, and it's wonderful to have you on, is to, for the audience, not everyone's done the research you've done, or you know, you're my peer in research. I've just done a bit through the years, and unaware of what's causing the division that we're having. And these discussions, sensitive, yes, but they need to be had. And it's not blaming and naming and shaming. It doesn't matter what faith you are. It's that, you know, we need to look at it with fresh eyes to understand, why are we still in conflict today? But before we get to that bit, I need to tell me about John D. Come on, you got to tell me what you know about this man.
Okay. So during the Renaissance time, here's another dialectical split where you have all of that Kabbalah and whatever coming in from once the Jews are expelled from Spain. A lot of them were Kabbalists. And so they start spreading the Kabbalah in these different areas. One of them is Prague with the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II. Some of them are in Venice. And this is where out of this Kabbalah rises modern capitalism. They started like doing like corporate branding kind of thing, but it was more mixed with magic and like, it's still magic today, right? Symbols and sigils and stuff like that. But this is where a lot of that kind of arose from. And so John Dee started, messing around with Edward Kelly and the scrying and the crystal balls and stuff like that, and started talking to these entities. And they were, if you read the accounts of these entities, they're kind of like giving them a good cop, bad cop kind of shtick, where it's like, it's like Protestant end times fear porn visions, and then like these ethereal visions. So if people like think about trauma-based mind control, where you show them kittens and puppies, and then you show them something disgusting, and then you kind of guide them that way, that's almost kind of what was happening to them if you read the accounts. And it's kind of similar to, what's our world today? It's like on Facebook, oh, it's like puppy dogs and happy things, and then all of a sudden,
it's the same. It's programmed. It's like programmed in.
So these are the kind of entities that were talking to them, and they were saying that they needed to start this one world synchronicity of religion. So here's where I would argue there's like this problematic unity of these opposites that was coming from this kind of like mind control, or this trauma that was being thrown upon Dee, and probably more Edward Kelly, because he's the medium. So he's the one who's like really experienced it. And sometimes he's like, John, I think these are demons. And John Dee's like, no, keep going. So anyway, so they're sent to see the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who's also involved in all this esoterica. And interestingly enough, it was kind of like what I would call like some of the, I'm not saying something about like New Age fraud altogether, but there is certain factions that can be fraudulent stuff. And so what happened was, there was apparently some of these esoteric Kabbalists mixed with Christian Kabbalists. They were selling unicorn horns, so-called, to the Holy Roman Emperor. Apparently they found like these sets of unicorn horns that they sold for a lot of money, which were probably like elephant tusks or narwhal horns or something like that.
We don't know. They could have been unicorns. Stop it. Stop it. They could have
been. If you want to take the unicorn literal route, feel free. But basically they were like telling them, if you grind this up, you'll cure diseases or whatever. But Rudolph II was, he created a lot of destability in his empire, and he had this kind of like occult court that was entertaining all this kind of stuff. And then this was connected with factions in Venice. The certain Jews, they were printing the Talmud. They had different magical recipes and stuff like that. They started working with Venice against the Ottoman Turks, and basically they started forming, this is where the deep state started forming, actually, because they started getting secrets of the state, Machiavellian, we can hide these things from people.
I read Machiavelli. I read it. I did years ago.
Right.
I did.
Whoa. And so the counter operative to this, and I know it's going to be controversial for some people, but the Jesuits were combating these things. And as much as people want to slander the Jesuits and call the Jesuit conspiracy or whatever, a lot of that is just Protestant and Masonic propaganda. But if you read the Jesuits like Robert Bellarmine and various like schools of this time, this was kind of like a covert battle going on between these. So there was a connection of occultism with Venice, Constantinople, because that had fallen to the Turks now, and then in like the Prague area, or like the German area.
Then at that time must have been really strong globally. It must have been an era of like alchemy, magic. I mean, it must have been, because as I said, I'm quantum physics 101. I'm fully aware of the power of magic and the alchemization of words and symbols, and how symbology works with frequencies. But it sounds, the way you describe it, must have been like the hot pot in evolution all the way through, must have been that era. It had to be that era because it was really strong. I mean, John Dee and that was with our Queen of England, and they were doing, you know, they were connecting to all the royal families around the world. People involved in this, weren't
and it's interesting
and
because
governments.
the Queen of England, Elizabeth I, when she wanted to attack Catholic France, she appealed to some dualism where she actually went to the Ottoman Sultan and said that the Catholics are heretics and you hate idolatry, so do we, so we need to attack them. So she was playing off of religion to the Muslims to get them to attack. And so
Look, to me, every religion plays off the other one, but we're not going there. All wars are by religions. We're not going there. We're trying to understand.
But my point is that the occult is the religion that is saying we're above all of this, but we're going to play off of the dualism in order to accomplish a goal. No, and I'm saying that the Jesuits were combating that and seeing through that. And then later on, once the Enlightenment comes, they had enough of there was a lot of weird movements that arose in the 1600s, a lot of millennialism, kind of like a primitive Zionism. There's a lot of this had to do with Kabbalah and Judaism and trying to figure out how to have this like universal utopia, if you will. This is like Francis Bacon, his Ben Salem stuff, New Atlantis. And then people got sick of the mysticism with it because I would argue it was an admixture that was problematic. And then that's when the Enlightenment rationalism reacts. And then that leads to the genocide of the French Revolution and all these sorts of things. And I would say anybody who is interested, they want to call themselves like quote unquote conspiracy theorists in the non-derogatory sense. Reading the Memoirs of Jacobism by Augustine Barwell, a Jesuit, that exposes the whole thing of the Enlightenment. It's a giant farce in a lot of ways. And it just shows you how everything we complain about today, with people saying one thing, acting another, conspiring in secret, all that was going on to bring about the French Revolution and all these sorts of things. And so from John Dee back to that was kind of laying the groundwork for that. But what happened was the Royal Society types, they didn't like the idea of all the magic being tied to that because it wasn't in vogue anymore. So they started to distance people and they started to focus more on people like Isaac Newton, and they'd kind of downplay his occultism. Or you'd see it'd be like the TV shows now where like the mad genius or something like that. They can kind of work up that archetype and still kind of turn it into this like science worship where like Neil deGrasse Tyson becomes the coolest guy in the world or something like that.
I'm with you. I mean, what we're doing, we're just touching on certain aspects of human civilizations to look at it in a certain context. We're looking in the looking glass and we're just looking at it from a different perception. And we should do. We can never say my way's the truth and that's it. It may be my truth, but it doesn't mean it has to be everyone else's. So I'm open to this discussion. Now, you know, John Dee, I was fascinated. Edward Kelly, I had an issue with him. I don't know, I'm the opposite to you see. John Dee, I was fascinated with his, I mean, I think his works are in London, with, you know, the things that he did. And it didn't take me towards occultism in any way, but it opened me up spiritually. So you see what can happen. Don't judge something. It opened me up more to the etheric world, to the consciousness, to the angelic realm. It opened me up because when, you know, this man was saying, I can talk to angels. Yeah, I can talk to angels. For me, it was, there's a possibility there. It opened me up. So what you may perceive as to be negative and wrong, it depends who's looking at it. If you're a bit of an arsehole or you're a bit psychotic and you're programmed into the matrix, you'll look at it whatever the way the matrix has told you to look at it. This is why I like an open conversation.
Well, I feel bad for his wife because he basically, the angels told her to have sex with Edward Kelly, and John Dee's like, please do it. So
I mean, but now, I mean, is it, but yeah, but we're going to take it in the context of what it was at the time. Right. I was born psychic. I can't help it. I was born seeing dead people. I can't help it. But I know from decades of being a medium, and they don't come to me. If anything come to me that was against, didn't resonate, out. It doesn't work. You'll get another medium that will play with the magic of it. And if you want to connect to a low vibrational being, they don't have to be dead. They can be alive. They can be a human being, you know, some psychopathic killer. or narcissist. Go and connect. It's your right to do whatever you want. So he obviously, you know, he connected to that and he chose to connect to that. In my
and that's
case, we
really
don't
like
all
you
do
said,
that, by the
free
way.
will. Free will is at the heart of it. So everybody makes their own choice.
It's always what you choose to experience. And that is why when I studied comparative religions, all of them, I could never, ever agree with my peers that this God was, you know, was this beast. I couldn't, because it's just not in me, and it never will be in me, and I can't. And because I'm that open to that, and I can't see as the source as anything, any imperfections at all. It's source energy, it's consciousness, it's love, it's we are the demons, humans are the demons.
Yeah, and I think
That's
that
a joke,
idea of opening yourself up to
Yeah.
something higher, especially when people come from a materialistic society, whether it's like American capitalism, like
Yeah.
I grew up in, and now it's turning into like radical Bolshevism in a different,
Oh, it's a bit
same
of
body, different set of clothing.
Let's be sensible. The world's going
And
a bit fascist at the moment, but
yeah, and there's two different kinds. There's the
Yeah.
you know, the Russian revolution kind, and
Yeah.
or there's the capitalist you know, destroying all these cultures
Yeah.
for profit kind, and they kind of work together. It's that capitalist communist dialectic. There's another false opposition. But it does give you a chance to look at everything going on and reevaluate and thinking,
Yes.
you know, maybe there are some things, dare we call them angels or demons, around us
Yeah.
that have a share in how we're doing this. I would say like going back to somebody who got out of Manichaean dualism, St.
Yeah.
Augustine. He wrote a work on the city of God and the city of man, and the idea is that the city of God has the angels, and the humans who are willing to be honest and truthful.
Yeah.
And then the city of man, which is run by the demons, who everybody just does what they will and, you know, destroys a bunch of stuff. So I think that that's a good way to kind of like summarize it. And I don't know how much time we got left, but I don't know if there's
I'm it's my show. I can go on as long as I
Oh, okay. I didn't know if there's any other lingering things or areas you wanted to go or talk about.
There's not lingering at all. I like that, and because what I want to raise now with the dualism and the false opposition, and there is still, I'm witnessing a lot of cultism. I'm not calling it negative. I'm just aware it's going on in the other timeline. It's not in my timeline. Is I'm also looking in, when I say the other timeline, is what, if I don't have a TV, but if I put the TV on, that's the timeline I'm talking about. Is one thing I've noticed, and I wanted to ask your opinion, it's just come in my head. I'm seeing globally science, how can I be sensitive on this? It's taken over the religion. It's taken it. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, everything you can think of. Science is now in control of, and why I've raised that, because I never thought I would see the day. Now, never in my life I thought I would ever see that. I always thought, oh, the religious buggers are always going to control the world, you know, but I'm witnessing it now. And what I'm looking at is something I personally never thought I'd ever see. Okay. Science can shut down every religion, every form of prayer, every form of worship. It shuts it. I've never, ever thought I would see that occur. I'm not going to go down the road, you know, I'm not going to go, but that to me would be, I'm not religious, but still would be detrimental to humanity spiritually, so to speak. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people are recognizing that. And, you know, I think it's what I call God's ecumenism. What I mean by that is like, we're being forced to see what a godless society looks like. And most people don't like it. Some people love it, but they tend to be the ones that are you know,
Mm.
pushing the trigger to push the dualism, and people will
Yes,
know what
yes,
dualism I'm talking about. I don't need to
yes.
mention it.
No,
But
dualism.
now people are you're starting to see what is it that can unite us. And I think that just the notion of life and being able to breathe,
Yes.
and caring about life, and
Yes.
that it does have value, and that, you know, I looked in America, at least, you know, it's funny, you see Orthodox Jews working with Catholic lawyers to resist lockdowns and things like that, and you know, not being upset when, you know, particular Catholic politicians get into a position of power, because to them, to the Jewish culture, that would scream Inquisition to them. That would
Yeah.
scare the crap out of them. That's been their
Yeah.
programming. But now they're starting to look past that, and everybody is starting to
Yeah.
slowly center, even if it's still kind of ambiguous, it's in a direction that I'd say is much more positive. And
It is
you're always going to have humans
Yeah.
bickering and bad things happening, but generally speaking, I do think you see a weeding out of these things that are completely anti-God in a very obvious sense, and
Yeah.
then pro-God, even if it's not so clearly defined,
Yeah.
it's at least a general sentiment that we
And
can have
I
some.
agree. I totally agree. And what I've witnessed, no matter what faith anyone is, or non-faith, or spiritual like me, is coming together, and it's billions now. I'm going to use the word waking up. I'm going to use it tonight for this context of this discussion. Is waking up, and coming together and supporting each other, because, you know, I want to say the enemy's at the door, but I look at it as a positive. Now, this is going to sound paradoxical, because of what's happening with science. It is pushing, as you just said, different faiths to come together for the first time in millennium. They're normally killing each other. You know, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. They're now coming together, which I think is a beautiful thing to happen. It's how we should be. You should be able to have your own beliefs and not impose it on another. But it's never got quite that far. Sometimes we're glitches of it, I get it. But yes, I agree. You were saying about, you know, what you've witnessed in America. This, and because it's like we know we've had enough of duality. We've had enough. Enough is enough. And our eyes are opening. We're seeing the alchemy. We're seeing the occultism. And I'm talking about in the control factor. And we're seeing, okay, for the first time ever, we got a choice. We have a choice. I choose to live my life. I choose to befriend another human being. You know, if you whether you're in religion or not, we're all from source. There's no one exempt in the whole of the universe. There is only consciousness. And so no one's other than the opposite. There's no duality. It's a singularity there. So yeah, the duality that's going on now, well, it was quite right, but it's not so much now. It's filtering away, it's dissipating. It's dissipating. And I think that's a really positive sign.
Yeah, I agree in the big picture, for sure, that there's a lot of things that are positive despite the globalist beast lockdown. And so I would also argue that we have a very similar situation, again, the clothing and bodies analogy applying to the first few centuries AD, where the Roman beast, the Roman Empire, was locking down. And this is where a lot of the Christian martyrs were. This is where a lot of crazy stuff happened. The Jerusalem temple was destroyed. For the Jews, the temple was everything. And then Christ, he in Catholic typology, there's various layers. And in Catholicism, it's not A, B, C, or D. It's E, all of the above, with something like that. So Jesus can call himself a temple because he, in his being, is what the temple represented. The temple represented the macrocosm of the cosmos. And that's the logos. That's the Greek understanding of the order of the universe. So Christ is the incarnation of that. And that is why he could call himself the new temple and raise it up in 3 days or whatever. Whereas the Jerusalem temple, the ones who made an idol out of it in the false sense and not understanding what it was supposed to be, which was a universal temple for all people, a universal religion, if you want to say a universal worship of the creator, I'll say that. A lot of people don't like that word, but the point is a lot of that typology is like kind of built into that system. And so right now, in my opinion, you see like a new Roman Empire where America, it very much acts or has acted like Rome of old, where it had like a golden age where, you know, it cared about justice and things like that, but it was hardcore. The military was a little overzealous, overextended itself, and now it's just kind of falling apart. And so it's kind of like a similar thing. And, you know, back, you think about like Nero, you know, he didn't play a fiddle, but that's kind of the archetype, but he let the city burn and blaming it on, you know, the Christians or whoever. Right. And now, at least in America, we had what was called the quote unquote summer of love, where the whole country was burning and it was blamed on certain people or whatever like that. And it's almost like a collective Nero oligarchy was you know, doing all these things. So all these very interesting themes are kind of repeating or whatever. And so I'd say, you know, 2000 years later, some of the same apocalyptic themes are present. And that's why I think it's very important for people to study the 2000 years ago apocalypse, if you will, and I think that will help give some insights as to where to go.
I think you're right. I mean, it gives you an understanding why, for me, because that's why I studied criminology and psychology. To me, it was like, why do people do what they do? That was it. It was just curiosity. And as I went back to the ancient civilizations as well, and I can see a perpetual cycle repeating itself until it seems, you know, we learn. For me, I call it the spiritual apocalypse. And what it has done, we're all, I mean, when we say people wake up, people are now recognizing the occultism, the dualism, the segregation, how the symbology works, how alchemy actually works, because there's also spiritual alchemy, and how symbols and signs and things like that, whether you see it in by big pharma or in any religious establishment, it's still energetic energy, and it all comes from a symbolic, how can I put this, initiation to that sect or that era. However, as we've stated already, you can't look at a consciousness back 2000 years ago with the same consciousness you got now. You've got to understand it was totally different then. All through the, you know, we've done a quick up the timeline to present day. It was
we covered 2000 years.
Yeah, we've done 2000 years in just in the blink of an eye, and I thought we'd done good in it. I mean, but it's a subject that I really wanted to, you know, I come from self-realization. I'm not religious, and I believe everything is source. Call it God, I don't care. It's all source, and we're here having the human experience. So, you know, however, I think sometimes, and I was an arsehole once, I'm sure I'm still an arsehole sometimes, but it was through ignorance. When you've got closed mind, if you close that mind down and only your way or the highway, you know, I went into different religions and become part of the religions, and each one said to me, all of them are going to burn in hell. And I went, bye. Because, you know, I just went by, because that is not a way out of fear to use discernment and to awaken the spiritual aspect of you inside. And I got to say, I mean, obviously you come from Catholicism, and you know, this man Jesus, the vibration of this being was just love and compassion, and I could never rule that out all my life, as well as the God that can't. This creator who created us could not do barbaric and inhumane things. Mm-hmm. Only man can do that with his ego. Man. And so I think there's also been an evolution of consciousness from back in the day. Yes, there were barbaric things done because their brain, their consciousness wasn't advanced enough to know any better. It was a live or die scenario. You know, if you didn't, you know, fight off or kill off, and, you know, it's just, we understand that, but And what I'm trying to say, we're not back there now, guys. 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. We're here now. We shouldn't be behaving like this, like our ancestors, to survive. They got us to where we are. We don't want to go backwards. Otherwise, it's going to loop back.
Well, yeah, like you said,
dark age.
Again, I think it's the analogy. I was trying to make the point of the same bodies, different clothing, where now we do fight and we do have war and there are barbaric things, but they're in a different way. Whereas now, at least we could be thankful that at least in the United States, most of the battles are legal battles. So, and you could probably actually, you know, setting aside the past of religious wars, we could probably thank the British Empire for a lot of the very civilized discourse. If you I think there's a famous debate, a famous debate, a positive
slaughtered the world. The British Empire has got no glory on it at all.
If anybody's seen the debate, I think it's like Bertrand Russell against a theist. It's like they're debating God versus atheism, but it's in the most like polite, intellectual way possible. You know, so I think most people appreciate that, even if you're going to disagree, if you can do it with that level of respect and understanding. That is the best you can do with the differences. However, unfortunately, some people can't. They can't do it. When you have a violent reaction to the differences, there's only so much you can stand there and get punched in the face before you're going to punch back. And then the problem is when people punch back, oftentimes the media says the person punching back is the one that started it or did something bad. And I think that is also another issue where people need to see that, you know, there is a sense of justice, but it can't be justice that turns into personal vengeance versus there is actually a justice that can be had and that needs to be executed at times. But like I said, it can go too far pretty easily.
Well, I mean, for me, I don't think any human being should hurt another human being because they're just killing themselves. But that's just my truth. However, you know, that's just my truth and no one has to resonate with that at all. But for me, understanding how the whole point is, how did we get here today where we are, is we need to look at, you know, millions of us have studied this stuff to varying degrees and levels, and it interested me. And I don't think, you know, people, there are many people that don't realize that alchemy is still used, and there are occult practices that are of a low vibration that are still being used. And it's a time that, you know, no, if you said this, I don't know, you could say this, I don't know how many years ago, you'd be called a conspiracy theorist, wouldn't you? There you go. I would have been burnt at a stake as a witch, maybe by the Catholics, who knows? But I would have been, no, that was a joke. I know you won't take it to heart. By the, you know, but the fact is,
I probably would have gotten in trouble too, but
oh god, yeah, I would have had you on the stake with me. You would have been on the stake with me, trust me. You know, you anarchists, you in the church. No, but seriously, we need to, why we're raising it is to bring to conscious awareness that you can't say shut your ears and your eyes on this spiritual journey. And it's, for me, it's a spiritual journey to self-realization, because we are still, we're not responsible, but it is part of our history of humanity. And we need to heal that history. It has to be healed as a civilization. And we need to stop the dualism, the judgment. Let people be who they want to be. Yeah. The majority of us, we have no issue with anyone else, no matter what they do. Whether they're gay, whether they're colored, you know, as long as you respect another person's space, you know, and if two of you get on, you get on. And the symbology that we would say was years ago, you conspiracy theorists, people are just waking up to it now because they're understanding, funny enough, through quantum physics. Most young people are really into quantum physics and the vibration and the frequency that words, language, symbols, and signs, and how the word is spoken can affect the vibration of an individual being. And I've said, I had a wonderful guest on a couple of months ago, and I said to him, you know, I've heard it in Christianity and I've heard it in Islam, when they recite or chant, yeah, it's a beautiful expression. I don't see any of the named religions. I just hear the vibration, the perfect vibration that's calming. So I like Gregorian chants. I do like to hear an Ardan.
That's why I go to the Latin Mass.
Yeah. I love to hear that. And I like to, and when I hear the Ardan, I've been in North Africa and I've heard this angelic voice call, and the man is weeping as he's just in love. And it's like beautiful. I don't see two separate religions. I see two, human beings connecting with their source, their way, their path, their experience. And we can all come together, like Michael said, with the Jews and the Catholics. He spoke about coming together to go against the collective, scientific, whatever, Trevor. They're coming together. They're forgetting they're different. They're not looking at each other as a dualistic way. They're one, and it's one for humanity. And that's what it's all about, is it not?
Yeah, it's ironic. You're unifying on what, at least we know we don't want that.
Yeah, there's something.
That's a great place to start.
It's going to get better. It has to get better. I mean, it depends. I mean, I've spoken to Muslims and Jewish and everything, and they're all coming from the same place. We need to stop this. There is only one source. One. There isn't 3, 4, 5, 6. There's one. And that's it. Get over yourself. If you have a faith or a belief or a truth, then follow that. Live that. Become that. That's absolutely fine. But, you can't condemn another person because they don't follow your belief system. That you can't do. And that causes duality. We've seen that in history. Now we're having, you want to call it spirituality and science at the moment, is at loggerheads now. Because if you've got Catholicism and Judaism coming together, and I'm sure there's Christianity coming in there, Stevie, then that's something to do with religion, that's to do with spirituality, that's to do with source. They're all coming in and becoming one. And I think that's perfect. And I don't think that's a false negative. I think it's a positive.
Yeah, and like I was saying, there's what's called the spirit of ecumenism that I would say is the mundane, generic kind that is watered down and leads to political correctness.
Yeah,
and that is part of certain factions in the church today that are battling as well for which version of that's going to be. So there's a whole problem with the hierarchy there, and so it's funny, the battles are everywhere right now in full display.
Everything,
the revelatory,
absolutely. As I say, and I've always got it, what is hidden will be revealed. But all of this work needs to be done on the individual, on the collective. It has to be done. It has to be done. And I always say we've done it. We are successful. Do you know what, Michael? That has been an absolutely, I didn't know where that conversation was going to go, because, I knew I didn't have to be extra sensitive with you. You know that. And it went places, and I'm glad we went where we went and we spoke.
Gloria, you hurt my feelings, okay?
Oh, well, get over it, Michael. Do you know what I mean? I'm allowed to get over it. No, but it was a discussion that I really, I wanted it to come out. We need to stop the division. We need to stop this. We need to stop the dualities. We need to stop this in any way we can. Human beings are all from source. Everyone, even the arseholes, all right? So, do you know what I mean? If they get in your face, just walk away from them. Just move them out of your life.
Well,
on that note,
I guess to wrap it up, there's a couple things that I can suggest if people are interested in looking at a couple of perspectives or whatever that might be useful. And they're less about like dense history and maybe more about spirituality or other ways looking at it. So I can maybe recommend a couple things before we wrap up here.
You can recommend, but remember, I'm listening to you. Don't you start, with your, what are you going to recommend? You got
Let me just grab a couple of books real quick.
Yeah. You recommend some books. Sell your wares shamelessly. What are you going to recommend?
Well, these aren't my books.
I know what you're doing. I know.
I just, if people are interested in more of the supernatural realities and different perspectives on angels or demons or whatever it might be, there's one I think that's very, very useful and touches upon all the things that we've talked about. There's aspects of what you might call alchemy, dealing with gold and silver, and dealing with the goods in other cultures and purging what's bad and all these sorts of things. Is written by 20th century Jesuit Jean Danielou. It's called The Angels and Their Mission.
Okay.
And this is going back to, like I said, the original earlier times of Christianity, dealing with the Greek sources, with the Latin, and just kind of like giving a spiritual perspective of how angels work in our lives and things like that. And whether you agree with it or not, I think people will find it interesting at the least.
I believe in angels. Well, they're energies. I believe in them because I experience them. How can I not?
If people want to get a little more hardcore about it, there's this book called,
here it comes,
called Slaying Dragons by Charles Fron, and this is the world of Catholic exorcism. So we give you the angels and the demons version here. You can choose which one might be more appealing to you, and it will tell you from the Catholic perspective, whether you agree with it or not, how you would be attacked, the types of things that would come at you, and what you could do about it. And I would also argue that during this time, a lot of this is very tied to what's called Our Lady of Fatima, and some things going on during back when the first crazy dualist revolution in Russia broke out in 1917. And so if people look into the messages of Fatima, I think they might find it interesting, because a lot of the things have come true, whether you believe it or not. It is very interesting.
I have years ago, I did look into that. There wasn't nothing. I just spent my life, nothing better to do than research. And I even went into that as well. I did years ago. I just went, it was like a quick bit all the way through. I suppose, obviously, that's why I'm here now doing shows, because I did the research and I'm able to talk to other people, and hopefully not with too much ignorance.
And I think there's a lot of hope, again, with a lot of the things we see, but we have to, people have to recognize the darkness and admit it for what it is, and not bury their heads in the sand. But you can't let that drag you down with it. You have to be able to stay above it,
I would say you've also got to recognize it in yourself. That's when you stop judging others, and that's recognize it in yourself.
That's a very good point.
Catch it in yourself when you're condemning, judging, and you're spitting or whatever you're doing. Catch it in yourself. If one thing I've learned for the past 2 years with the people that I've had guests on the show and my personal journey and others, is it's forced us, which is a blessing, to go within. And as I said, everything is within. If you are religious, that's not bad or good. It's, if you are, that your kingdom of your heaven is within. If you're coming from mine, it's like it's still within. It's still within. It's just we label it different and we come at it different, but it's the same bloody thing. Look at the darkness when you start judging, because there's false opposites. I want to end on this. We're supposed to, at the moment, humanity is supposed to hit the middle path, neutrality. It doesn't mean you're inactive and you don't do nothing. Trust me, if someone come up to attack me, they would have to be face planted. I would, to the death. That's a natural human experience. I'm talking about, these false opposites you got, like, I'm going to go this side. So then you're feeding the machine. You're feeding duality. Even if you perceive this side to be really bad, what they're doing, you perceive it, it's not good for humanity. It doesn't mean you lock on to the other one like a Rottweiler and attack it, because you're still feeding duality. It's the middle road. You've got to go the middle road. That's just my truth. If any of that resonates with any of you, please take it and do your research. And if it doesn't, then no way was I here to offend anyone. I mean, I was being very extra sensitive with Michael. I would never do that intentionally. But
I'm gonna cry in my safe space now.
Oh, you're gonna go cry. Put your toys out the pram. You know, we need to.
We got plenty of safe spaces around here these days.
Yeah, so. I bet you have. We need to be able to feel safe to have a healthy discussion. This is what we need to do now.
Honestly, I feel like this chat here was a safe space. So
it was definitely. I always have a safe.
Protect it from people overreacting to stuff.
Yeah,
so
that's it.
I'm very thankful for it.
No, it's a space that everyone. As I said, I've had Muslims on my show. I've had everything. I've had weirdos on. No, I haven't had no weirdos yet. I'm sure they'll come along. But
I'm the first one, right?
You're
first weirdo.
I think you could be. I don't know. Normally, people don't tell me. I don't need to know what they believe. But in your case, we had to talk on that topic in the Inception podcast because it's relevant to your studies. I'm not going to say, well, that's taboo. No. Why? It doesn't matter what you call. I'm non-duality. I say, what's your faith? That's non-duality. There's my faith. There's my label. Non-duality, self-realization. And yours is Catholic. Who cares? It's not about the labels that we give ourselves. It's not about that. It's about being more open and having the discussion and to stop the duality that's going on. And I want one more point. When I say, look at the darkness within, we've all got darkness within us. And it's not a negative. It's just work we need to do on ourselves. Biases, we're quick to judge another. No, my way or the highway. That's darkness. Sometimes, how many times in a lifetime, I know years ago, when I first met someone, I was like, I don't like them, But once I got to know them, such beautiful souls. So this is what we're talking about. Get out of your cults, get out of your duality and live your life. Go out and speak to other human beings, talk to them, share stories. Maybe we should go back to, passing down oral transition. We can't remember anything there, can we? I can't remember even who was on my show yesterday. I would be useless at it.
There's a lot going on these days, so
it's a lot going on in my head. I know. Well, I've tried to lighten it up at the end. I didn't want it to go, and I hope you've enjoyed it, Michael.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And I guess the only things I would wrap up with, my YouTube channel is kind of inactive, but I have a website. I have a lot of my old work on there. There's a way to watch it for free on the website and link to things, or if they want easier access, I have all my old stuff. It's $12 for the entire year on it. It's very cheap. And then I have the other one that has other things. And last thing I'd mention, I don't really, it doesn't really occur too much these days, but I do astrology readings from the viewpoint of Catholicism. So if people are interested in general Christianity or something like that, and at least hearing a different perspective on it, they can go to the website. All the information's on there. The rate is not very expensive. And, whatever people are interested in from what I've talked about, it will all kind of be there. And I will say I'm a bit more candid about some of the Catholicism stuff in the latter work, and the earlier work, not so much. So if you're not so enamored with that, the earlier stuff, occult science or some of these other things I've done, people might be interested in that. So you can always reach out to me. I'm very friendly. I don't bite. You can email and just ask me about this or that, and I can direct you to whatever I can.
Yeah, and as you don't know, there could be other Catholic brothers and sisters out there want to learn more. They want to go down the road that you've gone down as well. How about? Or
they might be like me, where I grew up and ran as far away from it as I could, but then you start realizing that there's a whole side of it that you were never taught, and I think that perhaps that's by design.
That's it, and that's happened to many people in many ways. They run off and rebelled and come back. So there you go. I want to know, why is your YouTube inactive?
I'd say that it's moving on to other projects, also censorship issues that I've had certain videos removed or flagged, and I'm just sick of playing the strikes game. And I just kind of do things for my website now because it's protected.
Well, there you go. Well, there is always, you can always go on, I'm on Rumble now as a backup channel, which is not censored. I never put anything out to offend anybody, so I know that, and I'm sure you don't either, but there's a lot of censoring going on, so there's always alternative sites to go to now. There's quite a few actually, and I know, I think even this, there's another, is it 20? I think he's got 20 million on there, or the other one, it's building up. People are as though either getting kicked out or they're just they're leaving certain platforms and going to alternative ones, which shows you, you know, at some point, you know, the occultists will realize, well, we're losing income, and it's not going to play it.
Yeah, you have to be in the world, not of it, and you pick your battles. So
yes, exactly. Be in the world.
That's why I didn't talk too much about contemporary things on your show.
No, we don't do that. No, we don't, because I just wanted to talk about occultism and dualism in its relevance to what we're experiencing today. I think we just need a bit of a backdrop, a background to give us a broader understanding of what we're going through today, what we're witnessing, and I think you were perfect on it.
Well, thank you. I hope that it was helpful, and again, thank you very much for having me on. It was a very lovely time, and I enjoyed it. So
okay,
I'd be happy to come back at some point if you
like. You will. You'll be back next year. Don't worry. You'll be back in the new year. You'll be back next year. So thank you everyone for watching Open Mind yeah, it is Open Minds. Open Mind special. My brain's still got questions in it. I'll have to talk to him off camera. They'll come out. And I look forward to the next time I have a conversation with an amazing guest. And Michael, thank you so much. Okay, you take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.